The night was as cold as a rattlesnake's heart when Nathan Cole first heard the wailing. It cut through the stillness of his ramshackle cabin like a knife, jolting him from a fitful sleep plagued by memories he'd rather forget. For a moment, he thought it might be the wind playing tricks on him, or worse, the ghosts of his past coming back to haunt him. But as the crying persisted, growing more desperate by the second, he knew it was neither. Nathan threw off his threadbare blanket and grabbed his Colt revolver from beneath his pillow. The year was 1877, and in this unforgiving corner of the Montana Territory, a man didn't answer unexpected calls in the night without protection. He lit a lantern with trembling hands and moved toward his cabin door, the rough-hewn floorboards creaking beneath his bare feet. The crying grew louder as he approached, a desperate, high-pitched sound that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. With his gun raised, Nathan unbolted the door and pulled it open, bracing himself for whatever danger waited on the other side. What he found instead nearly brought him to his knees. A small bundle wrapped in a worn blanket lay on his doorstep, squirming and wailing. Nathan lowered his gun and stared in disbelief. He'd been alone for so long that the sight of another living being, especially one so small and vulnerable, seemed almost foreign to him. "What in tarnation?" he muttered, crouching down to get a better look. The bundle shifted, and a tiny face appeared, red and scrunched with distress. A baby. Someone had left a baby on his doorstep in the middle of the night. Nathan glanced around wildly, searching the darkness for whoever had abandoned the child, but saw nothing but the shadowy outlines of pine trees and the distant mountains. He hesitated, then carefully picked up the bundle. The baby's cries intensified at being moved, small fists flailing against the confines of the blanket. Nathan held the child awkwardly, as if handling nitroglycerin that might explode at any moment. "Hush now," he said, his voice rough from disuse. "I ain't gonna hurt you." The baby paid no mind to his words, continuing to wail with impressive vigor. Nathan brought the child inside, closing the door against the biting cold with his foot. In the warm glow of the lantern light, he got his first good look at the baby's face. It was a boy, couldn't be more than a few months old. His face was red from crying, and a shock of dark hair peeked out from beneath the blanket. As Nathan stared at him, completely at a loss, the baby opened his eyes dark blue, like the sky just before dawn, and stared right back. "Where'd you come from, little one?" Nathan asked, gently bouncing the bundle in his arms like he'd seen women do in town. It didn't help. The crying continued, and Nathan felt panic rising in his chest. He knew nothing about babies. Nothing at all. He noticed a folded piece of paper tucked into the blanket and carefully extracted it while trying not to drop the squirming infant. The note was short, written in a hurried hand. "His name is Thomas. Please care for him." "I cannot." No signature. No explanation. Just a desperate plea from a parent who had reached the end of their rope. "Thomas," Nathan said, testing the name. The baby hiccuped mid-cry, as if in response. "Well, Thomas, I reckon you're hungry or something, but I don't have the first idea what to do about that." Nathan paced the small cabin, trying to remember what he knew about infants, which amounted to next to nothing. He'd never been around babies, never had a family of his own. The closest he'd come was watching his sister with her children years ago, before the war, before everything went to hell. Thomas's cries grew more frantic, and Nathan felt himself growing desperate. The nearest town, Willow Creek, was a good 10 miles away. Even if he saddled up now, it would be hours before he could get help, and he couldn't leave a baby alone in the cabin. "Sure, it's all right," he said, knowing full well it was not. "We'll figure this out together." As if in response to his inadequacy, Thomas let out an ear-splitting wail that made Nathan wince. He was way out of his depth here. The child needed someone who knew what they were doing, not a washed-up cowboy with too many ghosts and too few skills beyond riding and shooting. Just as he was contemplating his limited options, a knock sounded at the door. Nathan froze, instinctively pulling Thomas closer to his chest. Who would be out here in the middle of the night? Had the baby's mother returned? Or was it someone with less innocent intentions? With Thomas still crying in one arm, Nathan picked up his revolver with his free hand and approached the door cautiously. "Who's there?" he called out, voice raised to be heard over the baby's cries. "A friend," came the reply, a woman's voice, clear and steady despite the late hour. I heard the baby crying. I can help. Nathan hesitated. In his experience, strangers rarely brought anything but trouble. But Thomas was working himself into a frenzy, and Nathan was at the end of his rope. I'm coming in, the woman said when he didn't respond. That baby needs attention. Before Nathan could protest, the door swung open, and a figure stepped into the lantern light. She was tall for a woman, with auburn hair tumbling in loose waves past her shoulders. Her face was pretty in a weathered sort of way, with high cheekbones and eyes the color of whiskey. She wore a simple dress beneath a heavy coat, practical boots, and an expression that brooked no argument. Give him to me, she said, extending her arms. Nathan found himself surrendering the baby before he could think twice about it. As soon as Thomas was in her arms, she began to sway gently, making soft shushing sounds against his ear. The change was immediate. Thomas's cries began to subside, reduced to hiccuping sobs, and then to whimpers. There now, she murmured, her voice as soft as falling snow. That's better, isn't it? Nathan watched in amazement as the baby gradually quieted, his tiny body relaxing against the woman's chest. How did you do that? She glanced up at him, a slight smile curving her lips. He's hungry and probably needs changing. Do you have milk? Clean cloths. Nathan shook his head, feeling utterly useless. I just found him on my doorstep not 10 minutes ago. There was a note. He gestured to the piece of paper he'd placed on the table. The woman shifted Thomas to one arm with practiced ease and picked up the note. Her expression softened as she read it. Poor little one, she said. She looked back at Nathan, assessing him with a critical eye. My name's Hannah Edwards. I live about a mile east of here. I was on my way home from helping with a birth in Willow Creek when I heard the crying. Nathan Cole, he replied, lowering his gun at last and placing it on the table. I don't know the first thing about babies. That much is obvious, Hannah said, but there was no judgment in her tone. I was a midwife back east before I came out here. I've handled more babies than I can count. Thomas had quieted to the occasional whimper, his eyes drooping as Hannah continued to rock him. Nathan felt a surge of gratitude so intense it nearly took his breath away. I have supplies at my place, Hannah continued. Goat's milk that can be warmed, cloths for diapers, a proper blanket. This child needs all of that, and soon. I'll saddle my horse, Nathan said immediately. We can ride double. Hannah nodded, already moving toward the door with Thomas securely in her arms. Hurry, she said. He won't stay calm for long once he realizes there's still no food coming. Nathan pulled on his boots and coat, grabbed his hat, and followed her outside. The night air was bitingly cold, and he worked quickly to saddle his gelding, Rusty. The horse snorted in protest at being roused from sleep, but stood patiently as Nathan tightened the cinch. When he was finished, he turned to find Hannah standing nearby, still swaying slightly with Thomas cradled against her. The sight of them together, illuminated by the pale moonlight, stirred something in Nathan's chest that he hadn't felt in a very long time. Ready? He asked, his voice rougher than he intended. Hannah nodded and allowed him to help her mount before handing Thomas back up to her. Nathan swung up behind them, one arm reaching around to take the reins, the other hovering uncertainly near Hannah's waist to steady her. He could smell lavender in her hair and something else, something clean and simple that reminded him of better times. East, you said? He asked, trying to focus on the task at hand. Yes, follow the creek until you reach a stand of cottonwoods. My cabin's just beyond. Nathan nudged Rusty into motion, and they set off at a careful pace, mindful of the precious cargo they carried. Thomas had fallen into an exhausted sleep against Hannah's chest, his tiny features peaceful for the first time since Nathan had found him. How'd you end up all the way out here? Nathan asked after they'd ridden in silence for a few minutes. Midwives usually stay in towns where there are more folks needing their services. Hannah was quiet for so long that Nathan thought she might not answer. When she did, her voice was soft but steady. I came west with my husband 3 years ago. He had dreams of starting a ranch. We built the cabin together, started clearing land. She paused. He died of fever the first winter. I stayed because this is the only thing of his I have left. Nathan knew better than to offer empty condolences. Grief was a private thing out here in the wilderness. Instead, he said, it's not easy, living alone in these parts. No, Hannah agreed. But it's the life I've chosen. She glanced down at the sleeping baby. What about you, Mr. Cole? What brings a man to live so far from civilization? Nathan considered deflecting the question, but found himself answering honestly. The war. Did things during it I'd rather forget. After, I couldn't stand being around people much. Out here, a man can leave his past behind. Can he? Hannah asked quietly. In my experience, the past has a way of following us, no matter how far we run. Before Nathan could respond, Thomas stirred and began to fuss again, his face scrunching up in preparation for another bout of crying. We're almost there, Hannah said, turning her attention back to the baby. Just a little longer, Thomas. As promised, they soon came upon a stand of cottonwoods, their bare branches stark against the night sky. Beyond them, nestled against a gentle slope, was a small cabin. It was larger than Nathan's and better maintained, with a proper chimney and a small covered porch. A fenced garden, now dormant for the winter, stretched along one side, and a modest barn stood nearby. Nathan helped Hannah dismount, then swung down himself and led Rusty toward the barn. I'll see to my horse, he said. You take care of the little one. Hannah nodded and hurried toward the cabin, Thomas now crying in earnest again. By the time Nathan had unsaddled Rusty, made sure he had water, and given him a measure of oats he found in a bin, Hannah had a fire going in the cabin. He could see the warm glow through the windows as he approached. He knocked lightly on the door before entering, an odd gesture considering the circumstances, but it felt necessary. Hannah's cabin was indeed a home, not just a shelter like his own. It was neat and clean, with a table and chairs, a cooking area, shelves lined with books and jars, and a bed in one corner hidden behind a curtain. A rocking chair sat by the fireplace, and it was here that Hannah was seated, feeding Thomas from a small bottle. Found some preserved goat's milk, she explained as Nathan closed the door behind him. It's not ideal, but it will do until morning when I can get fresh milk from my nanny goat. I've changed him too. He should settle now. Nathan removed his hat and coat, hanging them on a peg by the door. He felt strangely out of place in this tidy, feminine space, his large frame and rough manners at odds with the quiet domesticity before him. You have my thanks, Mrs. Edwards, he said formally. I had no idea what to do with him. Hannah, please, she corrected. And you're welcome. I couldn't very well leave a baby crying in the night, could I? She looked down at Thomas, who was sucking eagerly at the bottle, his tiny hands curled against the glass. Poor mite. Wonder what happened to his mother. The note didn't say much, Nathan said, taking a seat at the table when Hannah nodded for him to do so. Could be any number of things. Sickness, poverty, a husband who left. He'd seen plenty of desperate situations in his travels. Women left alone with children they couldn't feed, forced to make impossible choices. Or perhaps she died in childbirth, Hannah suggested. It happens all too often, especially out here where proper medical care is scarce. She sighed. Whatever the reason, she must have been desperate to leave him with a stranger. How do you know she meant to leave him with me specifically? Nathan asked. Could be she just saw a cabin with smoke coming from the chimney and took a chance. Hannah considered this. Perhaps. Or perhaps she knew something about you that made her believe you'd care for him properly. Nathan snorted. Then she was sorely mistaken. I'm the last person who should be responsible for a child. Hannah's eyes met his, thoughtful and assessing. And yet here you are, seeking help for him in the middle of the night instead of ignoring his cries or taking him straight to the nearest orphanage. Nathan had no response to that. He watched as Thomas finished the bottle, his eyes drifting closed again. Hannah set the bottle aside and gently lifted the baby to her shoulder, patting his back until a small burp escaped him. There, she said with satisfaction. That should hold him for a few hours at least. She rose from the rocking chair and moved toward the bed in the corner, where Nathan now saw she had arranged some blankets into a makeshift cradle. She placed Thomas in it carefully, tucking the blankets around him, and stood watching him for a moment before returning to where Nathan sat. You can stay the night, she said matter-of-factly. It's too late to be riding back, and he'll need feeding again before dawn. You can take the chair. She nodded toward a cushioned armchair in the corner. I've slept in it myself on occasion. It's comfortable enough. Nathan wanted to protest, to insist he'd return to his own cabin, but the thought of riding back through the cold night only to face more of the same problem in a few hours seemed foolish. Besides, There was something comforting about Hannah's calm competence, about not being alone with his thoughts for once. "Thank you," he said simply. Hannah nodded and moved about the cabin, banking the fire for the night and setting out a blanket and pillow for him. Nathan watched her, noting the efficient way she moved, the quiet strength in her slender frame. She was a woman accustomed to handling things on her own, just as he was a man used to solitude. Yet somehow, the presence of the tiny sleeping baby had thrown them together, creating an unexpected connection in the vastness of the frontier. As Nathan settled into the chair, pulling the blanket over himself, he found himself wondering what the morning would bring. One thing was certain. Life had just become a great deal more complicated than he'd ever expected. The first gray light of dawn was filtering through the windows when Nathan awoke. For a moment, he was disoriented, his body stiff from sleeping in the chair, his mind struggling to place his surroundings. Then he remembered the baby on his doorstep, the woman who had appeared like an answer to a prayer he hadn't even known to make. He sat up, wincing as his muscles protested the movement. The cabin was quiet, the fire reduced to glowing embers. Nathan glanced toward the corner where Thomas had been sleeping, but found the makeshift cradle empty. A moment of panic seized him before he spotted Hannah standing by the window, the baby cradled in her arms. She was humming softly, a gentle tune that stirred something in Nathan's memory, his own mother, perhaps, singing to him long ago. Hannah turned at the sound of his movement, her face softened by the early morning light. "Good morning," she said quietly. "He's been up for a while, but I didn't want to wake you." Nathan ran a hand through his hair, aware that he must look a sight. "I'm sorry. I should have heard him." "You were exhausted," Hannah said simply. "And he wasn't crying, just awake and hungry." She nodded toward the stove, where a pot was heating. "I've been up since before dawn. Milked the goat, got some proper food for this little one." Nathan stood and stretched, his back cracking audibly. "You should have woken me. I could have helped." Hannah's smile was brief but genuine. "With milking a goat? Have you ever done that before, Mr. Cole?" "Nathan," he corrected, returning her smile somewhat sheepishly. "And no, can't say that I have. But I'm willing to learn." Something flickered in Hannah's eyes, surprise, perhaps, or approval. She nodded. "Well, Nathan, there's coffee brewing if you'd like some. And I've got some cornbread left from yesterday that'll do for breakfast." Nathan moved to the stove, pouring himself a cup of the strong black coffee. It was better than what he made for himself, rich and fragrant. "You're being mighty generous to a pair of strangers who showed up in the middle of the night." Hannah was quiet for a moment, looking down at Thomas, who was contentedly sucking on his fist. "I believe in helping those in need," she said finally. "It's what makes us human, isn't it? Besides, this little one can hardly be held responsible for his circumstances." Nathan sipped his coffee, watching her over the rim of the cup. In the light of day, he could see her more clearly. She was younger than he'd first thought, probably in her late 20s, though life on the frontier aged a person quickly. Her hair was indeed auburn, with strands of copper and gold catching the morning light. She wore it loosely braided now, practical for the day's work ahead. Her dress was simple but well made, dark blue with tiny white flowers scattered across the fabric. "What happens now?" he asked after a moment. "With Thomas, I mean." Hannah met his gaze steadily. "That depends on you, I suppose. He was left on your doorstep." Nathan set down his cup, a protest forming on his lips, but Hannah continued before he could speak. "The nearest town with an orphanage is in Helena, and that's a 3-day ride in good weather. With winter coming on, it could be dangerous to attempt it with an infant." She hesitated. "He could stay here with me until spring. I have the supplies and knowledge to care for him." The offer hung in the air between them, unexpected and generous. Nathan studied her face, looking for signs of reluctance or doubt, but found only calm resolve. "That's a big responsibility to take on," he said carefully, "especially for a woman living alone." Hannah's chin lifted slightly. "I'm quite capable, Mr. Cole." "Nathan, I've delivered dozens of babies and advised new mothers on their care. And as I said, I have the means to provide for him." "I wasn't questioning your capability," Nathan said quickly. "Just, why would you do this? Take in a child that's not yours, with no promise of compensation or help." Hannah was quiet for a long moment, her eyes on Thomas. When she spoke, her voice was soft but clear. After my husband died, I discovered I was with child. I was alone, in a new place, with winter bearing down. I did everything right, took all the precautions I would have advised any expectant mother to take. Her voice faltered slightly. I lost the baby in my 6th month. A little girl. Nathan felt a tightness in his chest, a mixture of sympathy and understanding. I'm sorry, he said, the words inadequate but sincere. Hannah nodded, acknowledging his sympathy without looking up. Since then, I've helped other women bring their babies into the world. It's my calling, I suppose. But this. She gently stroked Thomas's cheek with one finger. This feels like a gift, a chance to care for a child who needs me, even if only for a little while. Nathan was silent, absorbing her words. He'd been prepared to ride to Willow Creek today, to hand Thomas over to whoever would take him the preacher's wife, perhaps, or one of the town's more charitable matrons. But Hannah's offer presented another path, one that seemed kinder to the baby who had already been abandoned once. If you're sure, he said finally, then I accept your offer. But I want to help. With supplies, with anything else you might need. Hannah looked up then, surprise evident in her expression. You would do that? Nathan shrugged, uncomfortable with her scrutiny. He was left on my doorstep. That makes him my responsibility, at least in part. And I can't in good conscience leave all the burden on you. A slow smile spread across Hannah's face, transforming it in a way that made Nathan's breath catch unexpectedly. Well then, she said, I believe we have an arrangement. Before Nathan could respond, Thomas began to fuss, his little face scrunching up in what was becoming a familiar prelude to crying. Hannah turned her attention back to him, moving to the stove to check on the milk heating there. Would you like to feed him? She asked, pouring the warm milk into the bottle. Nathan hesitated, then nodded, setting down his coffee cup. Hannah showed him how to hold Thomas properly, supporting his head, and how to position the bottle. The baby latched on eagerly, his tiny hands coming up to rest against the glass. There, Hannah said softly. He likes you. Nathan wasn't so sure about that, but he had to admit there was something profoundly moving about holding this small life in his arms, about watching those dark blue eyes stare up at him with complete trust. It awakened feelings he'd thought long buried: protectiveness, tenderness, a sense of purpose beyond mere survival. I should get back to my place, he said after Thomas had finished eating and Hannah had shown him how to burp the baby. I've got chores waiting, and you've already done more than enough. Hannah took Thomas from him, settling the baby against her shoulder with practiced ease. When will you return? She asked, and Nathan heard the unspoken question beneath her words. Would he return at all? Tomorrow, he said firmly. I'll bring whatever supplies I have that might be useful, and I can chop more firewood for you. Repair anything that needs fixing around here. Hannah nodded, relief visible in the slight relaxation of her shoulders. Tomorrow, then. Nathan gathered his hat and coat, donned his gloves, and headed to the barn to saddle Rusty. As he rode away from Hannah's cabin, he glanced back once to see her standing on the porch, Thomas in her arms, watching him go. The sight stayed with him all the way back to his own lonely cabin, a warm counterpoint to the chill of the winter morning. He spent the day in a flurry of activity, completing his usual chores with unusual energy. He checked his stores, setting aside dried beans, salt pork, coffee, and the last of his sugar to take to Hannah's cabin. He found a wooden crate that could be fashioned into a proper cradle with a little work, and he loaded it onto a small sledge along with extra blankets and firewood. As he worked, Nathan found his thoughts returning again and again to Hannah and the baby. He'd been alone for so long that the sudden intrusion of other lives into his carefully maintained solitude should have been unwelcome. Instead, he felt a strange anticipation building in him, a sense of looking forward to something for the first time in years. That night, as he lay in his bed listening to the wind moan around the corners of his cabin, Nathan realized the silence that had once been his comfort now felt empty, hollow. He missed the soft sounds of Thomas's breathing, the gentle creak of Hannah's rocking chair, the sense of shared purpose that had briefly united them. Getting soft in your old age, Cole, he muttered to himself, turning over to stare at the wall. But even as he tried to dismiss these new feelings, he knew something fundamental had shifted. Like a stone tossed into a still pond, the arrival of Thomas had sent ripples spreading outward, disturbing the careful equilibrium of his solitary existence. Tomorrow couldn't come soon enough. The journey to Hannah's cabins the next day took longer than expected. The sledge loaded with supplies was unwieldy, and Rusty had to pick his way carefully through patches of ice and snow. By the time Nathan arrived, the afternoon sun was already beginning its descent toward the western mountains. Smoke curled invitingly from Hannah's chimney, and as Nathan approached, he saw her hanging laundry on a line stretched between two posts near the cabin. Even from a distance, he could tell she was singing, her voice carrying on the crisp air though he couldn't make out the words. Thomas was nowhere in sight, presumably napping inside. Hannah spotted him as he drew nearer, and her face broke into a smile that seemed to brighten the winter landscape. She waved, then finished pinning a cloth diaper to the line before walking to meet him. "I was beginning to wonder if you'd changed your mind," she said as he dismounted. Nathan shook his head. "Just took longer with the sledge. Brought some things I thought might be useful." He gestured to the loaded sledge behind Rusty. Hannah's eyes widened as she took in the pile of supplies. "You didn't need to bring so much." "It's not much," Nathan said, suddenly self-conscious. "Just some food, extra blankets. And this," he pulled the wooden crate from the pile. "Thought I could fix it up into a proper cradle for Thomas. More comfortable than blankets on a bed." Hannah touched the rough wood of the crate, her expression softening. "That's very thoughtful. Thomas will appreciate it, I'm sure." She looked up at Nathan, studying his face as if seeing him for the first time. "You've gone to a lot of trouble." Nathan shrugged, uncomfortable with her scrutiny. "Least I could do. How is the little fella?" "See for yourself," Hannah said, nodding toward the cabin. "He's awake now. I just heard him starting to fuss before you arrived." Sure enough, as they approached the cabin, Nathan could hear Thomas's distinctive whimpering coming from inside. Hannah pushed open the door, and Nathan followed her in, bringing the crate with him and leaving the rest of the supplies to be unloaded later. Thomas was lying on a blanket spread on the floor, his tiny legs kicking in the air as he worked up to a proper cry. When Hannah lifted him, he immediately quieted, his face turning instinctively toward her chest. "Hungry again," Hannah said with a small laugh. "He's a good eater, which is a blessing. Means he's healthy." Nathan set the crate down near the fire and began to examine it more carefully, mentally planning the modifications he would need to make. "How often does he need to eat?" he asked, pulling a small knife from his belt to start shaving down the rough edges of the wood. "Every few hours during the day, a bit longer at night now that he's getting a full belly regularly," Hannah replied, settling into her rocking chair with Thomas. "He slept for a good 4 hours straight last night, which was a welcome relief." Nathan nodded, focusing on his work to avoid staring at the intimate tableau of Hannah nursing the baby. It was a simple, natural act, but it stirred something in him, a longing for the kind of normal family life he'd never thought he wanted. They fell into a comfortable silence, broken only by the soft sounds of Thomas feeding and the scrape of Nathan's knife against wood. It was strange how quickly it had begun to feel natural, being here in Hannah's cabin, working while she tended to the baby. As if they were a family, brought together by circumstances but united by something more. "Tell me about yourself," Hannah said after a while. "Where you're from, what brought you out here? You mentioned the war, but not much else." Nathan's hands stilled momentarily before resuming their work. "Not much to tell. Grew up in Tennessee. Fought for the Confederacy because that's what was expected, though I had no strong feelings about the cause. Saw things during those years that changed me, and not for the better." He shrugged. "After, I drifted west. Worked as a ranch hand, a guide, whatever paid. Ended up here about 5 years ago. Liked the solitude, so I stayed." Hannah was quiet, absorbing his words. "And family?" she asked softly. "Do you have anyone back east?" Nathan shook his head. "Parents died before the war. Sister married and moved to California. We write occasionally, but it's been years since I've seen her." "It must be lonely," Hannah observed, her voice free of judgment. Nathan looked up then, meeting her gaze. "It was my choice. After the war, I didn't much like the man I'd become. Thought it better to keep to myself." Hannah shifted Thomas to her shoulder, patting his back gently. "And now, do you still feel that way?" It was a simple question, but it cut to the heart of the matter in a way that made Nathan pause. Did he still feel that solitude was his only option? The events of the past 2 days had disrupted his carefully constructed isolation, forcing him to interact, to care, to feel things he'd deliberately numbed himself against. I'm not sure, he admitted finally. Finding Thomas has complicated things. Hannah nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Children have a way of doing that. They demand that we be better than we are, that we rise to meet their needs rather than dwelling on our own failings. Thomas let out a loud burp, and Hannah laughed, the sound bright and unexpected in the quiet cabin. There we go, she said, wiping his mouth with a cloth. Feel better now, don't you? Nathan found himself smiling in response, charmed despite himself by both the baby's antics and Hannah's obvious delight in them. He turned back to the crate, working more quickly now as an idea took shape in his mind. I could stay, he said abruptly, not looking up from his task. Not in the cabin, of course, but nearby. Could build a lean-to outside, just until spring. That way I could help more with Thomas, bring in firewood, hunt for fresh meat. Make things easier for you. The silence that followed his offer was so profound that Nathan finally looked up, worried he'd overstepped. Hannah was watching him, her expression unreadable, Thomas now dozing against her shoulder. You would do that? She asked finally. Give up your home, your solitude, to help care for a child that isn't yours. Put that way, it did sound unlikely, even to his own ears. But Nathan found, somewhat to his surprise, that he meant it. Yes, he said simply. I would. Hannah stood and carefully placed Thomas on the blanket on the floor before turning back to face Nathan. There's no need for a lean-to, she said firmly. This cabin has room enough. There's the loft, she pointed to a ladder leading up to a small space under the eaves, where I store things now, but it could be cleared out, made comfortable enough. Nathan stared at her, taken aback by the suggestion. I couldn't impose like that. It's not an imposition if I'm offering, Hannah countered. And it makes more sense than you freezing in a lean-to all winter. Besides, Thomas would benefit from having both of us close by. There was a practicality to her proposal that Nathan couldn't argue with, yet he hesitated. Living under the same roof as Hannah, even with the propriety of separate sleeping spaces, was a far cry from his solitary existence. It meant conversation over meals, shared responsibilities, the daily intimacies of domestic life. It meant allowing someone to see him as he truly was, not just the carefully constructed facade he presented to the rare visitor. People might talk, he said finally, if they found out. Hannah raised an eyebrow. We're 10 miles from the nearest town, and I haven't had a visitor in months. Besides, we're caring for an orphaned infant. I think even the most proper ladies of Willow Creek would forgive us under the circumstances. Put that way, it seemed foolish to object. And truth be told, Nathan found he didn't want to. The prospect of spending the winter here, watching Thomas grow, working alongside Hannah, was surprisingly appealing. All right, he said, if you're sure. Hannah's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. I am, she said. Now, let's finish that cradle and unload your supplies. It'll be dark soon, and we should get you settled before night falls. The next few days passed in a flurry of activity as Nathan moved his essential belongings from his cabin to Hannah's. He brought his clothes, his tools, his rifle and pistol, leaving behind the sparse furnishings and stored food for later retrieval if needed. The loft, once cleared of Hannah's stored preserves and extra quilts, proved to be a cozy enough space, with room for a bedroll and his few possessions. Thomas settled into a routine of sorts, sleeping for longer stretches at night and becoming more alert during his waking hours. Hannah showed Nathan how to change diapers, how to burp the baby after feeding, how to soothe him when he was fussy. Nathan's large hands seemed ill-suited to such delicate work at first, but he learned quickly, taking pride in each small task mastered. They established their own routines as well. Nathan rose early to tend to the animals Rusty, Hannah's goat Marigold, and the half-dozen chickens that provided eggs. He chopped wood, hunted when weather permitted, and worked on improvements to the cabin, a new shelf here, a repaired hinge there. Hannah cooked, cared for Thomas, tended to her dried herbs and medical supplies, and continued to see the occasional patient from nearby homesteads who sought her midwifery skills. In the evenings, they sat by the fire, Thomas often sleeping in the cradle Nathan had crafted for him. Sometimes they talked about their pasts, about the changing seasons, about Thomas and what the future might hold for him. Other times they sat in comfortable silence, Nathan whittling or cleaning his guns, Hannah sewing or reading from one of her precious books. It was during one such evening, nearly 2 weeks after Thomas had first appeared on Nathan's doorstep, that Hannah broached a subject they had both been avoiding. "We should discuss what happens in the spring," she said, setting aside her mending. "With Thomas." Nathan's hands stilled on the piece of wood he was shaping into a small toy for the baby. "What do you mean?" Hannah glanced at Thomas, sleeping peacefully in his cradle. "He can't stay with us forever. He needs a proper family, parents who can raise him as their own." The words, "with us," hung in the air between them, an acknowledgement of the strange little family unit they had formed. Nathan found himself surprisingly resistant to the idea of giving Thomas up, even though he knew Hannah was right. "There's the orphanage in Helena," he said reluctantly. "But I've heard conditions in such places can be harsh." Hannah nodded, her expression troubled. "That would be a last resort. I was thinking more of finding a suitable family to adopt him, perhaps through my connections as a midwife. I know several couples who have longed for a child but been unable to conceive." It was a sensible solution, yet Nathan couldn't bring himself to fully embrace it. "And if we can't find such a family, what then?" Hannah was quiet for a moment, her eyes on the fire. "I would keep him," she said finally. "Raise him as my own." The simple declaration stirred something in Nathan's chest: admiration for her selflessness, but also a strange sense of loss at the thought of Hannah and Thomas continuing on without him once spring arrived and his temporary residence in the loft was no longer necessary. "You would do that? Take on the raising of a child alone?" he asked. Hannah looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "Not everyone has the luxury of a conventional family, Nathan. Sometimes we must create our own versions of family from the materials at hand." Nathan considered her words, turning them over in his mind like the piece of wood in his hands. "And what if," he began, then stopped, uncertain how to phrase what he was thinking. "What if?" Hannah prompted gently. Nathan took a deep breath. "What if there was another option? What if Thomas could have 2 parents, not just one?" Hannah's eyes widened slightly, but she didn't look away. "Are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting?" Nathan set down his carving and knife, gathering his courage. "I know we haven't known each other long. And I know I'm not much of a catch, a washed-up cowboy with too many dark memories and not enough to offer a woman like you. But these past weeks, being here with you and Thomas, it's the first time in years I've felt like I might be worth something. Like I might have something to contribute beyond just surviving." Hannah's expression softened, but she didn't speak, allowing him to continue. "I'm not proposing marriage, not yet, anyway," Nathan said hurriedly. "That would be presumptuous. But I am suggesting that perhaps, over time, if we found we suited each other well enough, it might be a solution that would benefit all 3 of us." The silence that followed seemed to stretch for an eternity. Nathan could hear his own heartbeat, the crack and pop of the fire, the soft breathing of Thomas in his cradle. He had laid his soul bare in a way he hadn't done in years, possibly ever, and the vulnerability of it left him feeling raw and exposed. Finally, Hannah spoke, her voice thoughtful. "It's an interesting proposition, and not without merit." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I've grown fond of you, Nathan. More than fond, if I'm being honest. But marriage is a serious commitment, especially in these parts where divorce is nearly impossible and a woman has few rights of her own." Nathan nodded, understanding her caution. "I wouldn't ask for an answer now, only that you consider it as a possibility. We have all winter ahead of us to learn more about each other, to see if such an arrangement might work." Hannah smiled then, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. "I will consider it," she said. "And in the meantime, we'll continue as we have been caring for Thomas, learning from each other, and seeing where this unexpected journey takes us." It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either, and Nathan found himself more content with that answer than he would have expected. He picked up his carving again, returning to the simple wooden horse he was crafting for Thomas, who was still too young to play with it, but would grow into it in time. Time. That was what they had now, time to discover if the warmth growing between them could develop into something lasting, something strong enough to build a family upon. And for now, that was enough. As winter deepened, the snow piled higher around the cabin, and the world narrowed to the space they shared. The forced intimacy might have been uncomfortable, even intolerable, with someone else, But Nathan found himself growing more at ease with Hannah with each passing day. He learned her habits, her preferences, the small tells that indicated her moods. He came to appreciate her quiet strength, her practical intelligence, her unwavering devotion to Thomas. And Hannah, in turn, seemed to be studying him, noting the way he gentled his voice when speaking to the baby, the care he took with his chores, the nightmares that sometimes woke him in the small hours. She never pressed him to talk about the dreams, but she was always there with a cup of hot coffee and a sympathetic presence when he climbed down from the loft, shaken and unable to return to sleep. Thomas thrived under their care, growing plumper and more alert with each passing week. He began to smile a toothless, dimpled grin that never failed to delight both his caregivers. He learned to recognize their voices, turning his head when either of them spoke, his dark blue eyes tracking their movements across the cabin. Christmas came and went, a quiet celebration marked by a special dinner of rabbit stew, cornbread, and preserved peaches, and small gifts exchanged: a knitted scarf from Hannah to Nathan, a carved wooden box for her, herbs from him to her, and for Thomas, a soft blanket Hannah had pieced together from scraps of fabric and a tiny wooden rattle Nathan had fashioned. January brought the coldest days of the year, with temperatures dropping so low that even inside the well-insulated cabin, their breath fogged in the air. They took to sleeping in the main room on those nights, Hannah in her bed, Nathan on a pallet near the fire, with Thomas's cradle between them. It was an arrangement born of necessity. The loft was simply too cold, but it created a new level of intimacy. The sound of their breathing mingling in the darkness, the shared responsibility of rising to tend to Thomas when he woke in the night. It was during one such bitter night in late January that Thomas fell ill. He had been fussy all day, refusing his bottle, his small face flushed with fever. Hannah had dosed him with willow bark tea, diluted for his size, and bathed his forehead with cool water, but as night fell, his condition worsened. His breathing became labored, each inhalation a struggle that seemed to rack his tiny frame. Nathan watched helplessly as Hannah paced the cabin with Thomas in her arms, her face drawn with worry. "What can I do?" he asked, feeling utterly useless in the face of the baby's distress. Hannah paused in her pacing, bouncing Thomas gently as he whimpered. "Heat water," she said, "as hot as you can get it. We need to create steam to help him breathe." Nathan moved quickly to obey, filling a pot with water and placing it on the stove. As it heated, Hannah continued to pace, murmuring soothing words to Thomas that seemed as much for her own comfort as for his. "Should I ride for the doctor in Willow Creek?" Nathan asked, though the thought of leaving them alone in the middle of the night, with Thomas so ill, filled him with dread. Hannah shook her head. "The snow's too deep, and it's too cold. You'd never make it before morning, and by then." She didn't finish the sentence, but Nathan understood. By morning, it might be too late. The water began to steam, and Hannah moved closer to the stove, holding Thomas so that he could breathe in the moist air. "We need to make a tent," she said. "Something to concentrate the steam around him." Nathan looked around the cabin, then went to the chest where Hannah kept her linens. He pulled out a large sheet and, using string and nails, rigged a makeshift tent over the stove, creating a small enclosed space where the steam could collect. Hannah stepped inside with Thomas, and Nathan joined them. The three of them huddled together in the humid air. Thomas's breathing was still labored, but he seemed a fraction less distressed, his cries softening to whimpers. "It's helping a little," Hannah said, relief evident in her voice. "We need to keep this up through the night. The steam will help loosen whatever's causing the congestion." Nathan nodded, already mentally calculating how to maintain the steam without running out of water or risking the fire dying down. "I'll take first watch," he said. "You rest while you can." Hannah looked like she might protest, but exhaustion was evident in the slump of her shoulders, the shadows under her eyes. She nodded, passing Thomas carefully to Nathan. "Wake me in 2 hours, or sooner if his condition changes." Nathan settled onto a stool inside their makeshift tent, cradling Thomas against his chest. The baby felt unnaturally warm, his small body radiating heat even through the thin nightgown Hannah had dressed him in. His breathing came in short, painful gasps that seemed to echo in the enclosed space. "Stay with us, little man," Nathan murmured, gently rocking him. "You've got a lot of living to do yet." As the night wore on, they took turns holding Thomas, maintaining the steam, dozing in brief snatches when they could. Nathan watched Hannah with the baby, noting the tender way she held him, the fierce determination in her eyes. She was fighting for Thomas with everything she had, and Nathan found himself praying, actually praying, for the first time in years that it would be enough. Sometime in the darkest hour of the night, when the fire had burned low and the wind howled around the corners of the cabin like a lost soul, Thomas's fever broke. One moment he was burning up, the next sweating profusely as his temperature dropped. His breathing eased, becoming deeper and more regular, and he fell into a natural sleep rather than the fitful dozing of before. Hannah wept when she realized the worst had passed, silent tears of relief tracking down her pale cheeks. Nathan found himself fighting back tears of his own, a knot of emotion lodged in his throat that made it difficult to speak. They dismantled the steam tent, moving Thomas to his cradle where they could watch him more comfortably. Hannah collapsed into her rocking chair, exhaustion finally claiming her now that the immediate crisis had passed. Nathan covered her with a blanket, then took up position beside Thomas's cradle, unwilling to leave the baby's side even though the danger seemed to have passed. As dawn broke, painting the snow-covered landscape outside in shades of pink and gold, Nathan watched Thomas sleeping peacefully. His color returned to normal, his breathing easy and regular. The night's battle had left Nathan drained, but also strangely exhilarated. They had fought for this child's life together, and they had won. Hannah stirred, waking slowly, her eyes immediately seeking Thomas. When she saw him sleeping peacefully, a smile of pure relief transformed her tired face. She rose and came to stand beside Nathan, looking down at the baby they had come to love. "Thank you," she said softly, her hand finding Nathan's and squeezing it. "I couldn't have gotten through last night without you." Nathan turned his hand in hers, interlacing their fingers in a gesture more intimate than any they had shared before. "We did it together," he said. "The way parents should." Hannah's eyes met his, wide and searching. "Parents," she repeated, the word hanging in the air between them, full of meaning. Nathan nodded, suddenly certain in a way he hadn't been before. "I want to be his father, Hannah, and I want to be your husband, if you'll have me. Not just for Thomas's sake, but for my own, for yours, for the family we could be together." Hannah's free hand came up to touch his face, her fingers cool against his stubbled cheek. "Are you certain? This isn't just the emotion of the night speaking?" Nathan shook his head. "I've known for weeks, maybe since the first moment I saw you holding him. But I was afraid I wasn't good enough, afraid you deserved better than a man with my past, afraid to believe I could have something so precious as a family of my own. And now," Hannah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Now I know that some things are worth the risk," Nathan said. "That loving you and Thomas is worth any risk." Hannah's smile was like sunshine breaking through clouds after a storm. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes to all of it." Nathan bent his head and kissed her then, a gentle, tentative kiss that deepened as Hannah responded, her arms sliding around his neck, her body leaning into his. When they broke apart, both were smiling, a little shy but undeniably happy. Thomas chose that moment to wake, his small face scrunching up as he prepared to demand his breakfast. Hannah laughed, the sound bright and joyous in the morning light, and moved to pick him up. "Good morning, little one," she said, lifting him from the cradle. "You gave us quite a scare last night." Nathan watched them, his heart full to bursting with a happiness he had never expected to find. Thomas's illness had been terrifying, but it had also crystallized something important. They were already a family, bound together by love and shared experience rather than blood or legal ties. The rest was just formality. "We should be married soon," he said as Hannah settled into her rocking chair to feed Thomas. "As soon as the weather breaks enough for us to reach Willow Creek. No sense in waiting." Hannah nodded, her eyes soft as she looked up at him. "No sense at all," she agreed. "Though we'll need to file paperwork to legally adopt Thomas as well. Make him truly ours." "Ours," Nathan repeated, savoring the word. "I like the sound of that." The weather broke in mid-February, a brief thaw that left the snow wet and heavy but passable on horseback. Nathan rode into Willow Creek alone, returning the next day with the preacher, who performed a simple ceremony in Hannah's now their cabin, with Thomas as their only witness. The preacher also brought the necessary paperwork to begin the adoption process, as well as news from town and letters that had accumulated for Hannah over the winter. Life settled into a new rhythm after that, different yet familiar. Nathan found himself happier than he had ever been, taking joy in the simple domestic pleasures he had once scorned. Hannah's smile across the breakfast table, Thomas's growing repertoire of coos and babbles, the satisfaction of working to improve their home and land, not just for survival, but for comfort and beauty as well. Spring arrived gradually, then all at once, the snow melting to reveal patches of mud, and then green grass, the trees budding, wildflowers appearing in sheltered nooks. Thomas grew too, learning to roll over, to sit with support, to reach for the toys Nathan carved for him. His eyes, which had been dark blue at birth, lightened to a clear gray that reminded Nathan of mountain lakes. With the warmer weather came visitors, neighbors checking in after the long winter, patients seeking Hannah's midwifery skills, even the occasional traveler passing through. All were curious about the baby, and Hannah and Nathan told a simplified version of the truth that Thomas had been orphaned and left in their care, and that they had decided to adopt him as their own. No one questioned their right to the child or their devotion to him. Indeed, most seemed to find the story touching, a bit of brightness in the often harsh reality of frontier life. And if anyone thought it convenient that Hannah had acquired both a husband and a child in one winter, they kept such observations to themselves. Summer brought its own pleasures and challenges. Nathan built an addition to the cabin, a proper bedroom for them, with a smaller room adjacent for Thomas. Hannah expanded her garden, growing not just vegetables, but also flowers that brightened the yard and herbs for her medical practice. They acquired a milk cow to supplement Marigold's output, and Nathan began clearing more land with an eye toward eventually building a proper ranch. Thomas took his first tottering steps in late summer, lurching from Hannah's grasp to Nathan's waiting arms with a look of determined concentration that made them both laugh. His first word, appropriately enough, was "mama," followed closely by "dada," and then an explosion of vocabulary that had them constantly amazed by his quick mind. Fall came, painting the landscape in shades of gold and crimson. Nathan harvested the last of the garden with Hannah, stored firewood for the coming winter, and hunted to fill their smokehouse with meat. They were more prepared this year, more settled, more confident in their ability to weather whatever challenges the seasons might bring. On the anniversary of the night Thomas had appeared on Nathan's doorstep, they held a small celebration, a special dinner, a few simple gifts, a moment of reflection on how much their lives had changed in a single year. "I never thought I could be this happy," Nathan said as they sat by the fire that evening, Thomas asleep in Hannah's lap, exhausted from the excitement of the day. "Never thought I deserved to be." Hannah reached over to take his hand, her fingers warm against his. "Everyone deserves happiness, Nathan. Even those who have made mistakes, who carry burdens from the past. Perhaps especially them." Nathan brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm. "You taught me that. You and Thomas taught me that the past doesn't have to define the future." Hannah smiled, the firelight gilding her hair with touches of gold. "And you taught me that loss isn't the end of the story. That new beginnings can come from the most unexpected places." They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the flames dance in the hearth, each lost in their own thoughts. Then Nathan spoke again, his voice thoughtful. "Do you ever wonder about his mother? The woman who left him on my doorstep that night?" Hannah considered the question, looking down at Thomas's sleeping face. "Sometimes," she admitted. "I wonder if she knows he's safe, if she regrets her choice, if she thinks of him on his birthday." "I used to be angry with her," Nathan said, "for abandoning him, for not even trying to care for him herself. But now—" He paused, searching for the right words. "Now I'm almost grateful, not for her pain, or for what Thomas lost in never knowing her, but for the gift she gave us, even if it wasn't what she intended." Hannah nodded, understanding in her eyes. "She gave him a chance at life, and in doing so, she gave us a family." Nathan stood and moved to kneel beside Hannah's chair, one hand gently stroking Thomas's dark hair, the other finding Hannah's free hand. "She did. And I promise you both, I'll spend the rest of my life being worthy of that gift." Hannah leaned forward to kiss him, a tender promise of her own. "We already are," she whispered against his lips. "All three of us, together." As if sensing he was being discussed, Thomas stirred in his sleep, a small smile curving his lips as he dreamed. Nathan and Hannah watched him, their hearts full of love for this child who had brought them together, who had transformed their separate solitudes into a shared joy. Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall, soft flakes drifting past the window to blanket the world in pristine white. But inside the cabin, all was warmth and light and love, a family forged not by blood but by choice, by chance, and by the crying of a baby in the night, answered by two hearts brave enough to open to each other. And in that moment, Nathan knew with absolute certainty that no matter what challenges the future might hold, they would face them together. The lonely cowboy, the widowed midwife, and the abandoned baby who had somehow found in each other exactly what they needed most: a home, a purpose, and a love strong enough to last a lifetime.